My family called me a cash machine, while I'd been paying for their vacation for years. He won't mind, they said. I didn't respond, but when the next trip came around, they found out what I had done. I, 34M, discovered what my family really thought of me during what was supposed to be our annual beach house vacation planning session last month. The revelation hit me like a freight train, and what followed was a carefully orchestrated lesson they'll never forget. For 8 years, I'd been the silent financier of our extended family vacations. Every summer, the same routine: my parents, my 2 siblings with their spouses and kids, and me gathering at some rental property for a week of family bonding. What nobody seemed to acknowledge was that I was footing nearly 70% of the bill every single time. It started innocently enough when I landed my first decent-paying job in tech. My younger brother was still in college, my sister was a struggling teacher with 2 young kids, and my parents were on a fixed retirement income. When they suggested our first family vacation, I offered to help with costs. They were grateful, and I felt good about being able to contribute to family memories. But gratitude has a way of morphing into expectation, and expectation into entitlement. By year 3, nobody even pretended to calculate fair shares anymore. The planning conversations became exercises in creative budgeting where somehow my contribution always ended up covering the lion's share of expenses. Beach house rental, groceries, activities, dinners out. It all somehow became my responsibility while everyone else contributed token amounts. I told myself it was worth it for family harmony. I made good money, I was single with no kids, and seeing my nieces and nephews enjoy these trips felt meaningful. My parents seemed proud of how successful I'd become, and my siblings appeared grateful for my generosity. That illusion shattered completely 3 weeks ago. I was running late to the family planning meeting at my parents' house. Work had kept me longer than expected, and I arrived about 20 minutes after everyone else had gathered in the living room. As I approached the front door, I could hear animated conversation through the window. My hand was on the doorknob when I heard my sister's voice clearly. She was explaining to her husband how they could afford the upgraded beach house this year, the one with the pool and direct ocean access that cost nearly double our usual rental. Her exact words were burned into my memory. Don't worry about the cost. He won't mind covering the difference. He's basically our family cash machine at this point. My brother laughed and added that I probably didn't even notice how much I was spending on these trips since I made so much money. My mother chimed in, saying something about how nice it was that I didn't have a wife and kids to spend money on, so I could afford to be generous with family. The casual way they discussed my finances, the complete absence of gratitude, or even acknowledgement of what I'd been doing for years, it was breathtaking in its callousness. I stood there for several more minutes, listening to them plan an expensive vacation entirely around my wallet while treating my contributions as some kind of given resource. I took a deep breath, composed myself, and walked in as if I'd heard nothing. They greeted me warmly, and my sister immediately launched into her pitch about the upgraded rental. She showed me photos on her phone, talking about how perfect it would be for the kids and how we deserved to splurge this year. I nodded along, asked a few questions about dates and logistics, and told them it sounded great. They seemed pleased with my easy agreement, probably thinking their cash machine was operating exactly as expected. But I was already formulating a plan. Over the next 2 weeks, I played my part perfectly. I participated in group chats about meal planning and activity schedules. I even helped my brother research local attractions and made restaurant reservations for our group. To everyone else, I was the same reliable family member who could be counted on to make everything work financially. Meanwhile, I was quietly making other arrangements. The vacation was scheduled for the first week of July. On June 15th, exactly 2 weeks before departure, I sent a carefully crafted message to our family group chat. I explained that I'd been doing some financial planning and realized I needed to be more mindful of my spending. I was still happy to join the vacation, but I'd only be able to contribute my fair share, 1/6 of all expenses, since there were 6 adults in the group. I attached a detailed breakdown showing what 1/6 of the total costs would be, which came to about $800 per person. My usual contribution had been closer to $3,500. The response was immediate and panicked. My phone started ringing within minutes. First my mother, then my sister, then my brother. Each conversation followed the same pattern: confusion, then concern, then barely concealed frustration. They asked if I was having financial problems, if something had happened at work, if I needed help. I calmly explained that nothing was wrong. I was simply choosing to pay my fair share like any other adult in the family. When they pressed me about the sudden change, I mentioned that I'd been reflecting on fairness and wanted to make sure everyone was contributing equally to our family experiences. My sister was the most direct in her displeasure. She called me later that evening and spent 20 minutes explaining how this change would force them to cancel the vacation entirely. Her husband's teaching salary and her part-time work couldn't cover their portion of the upgraded rental. She reminded me how much the kids had been looking forward to the trip and how disappointed everyone would be. I listened sympathetically and suggested we could look into a more affordable option that everyone could actually afford. Perhaps something closer to home, or a shorter trip, or a less expensive rental property. The conversation grew tense when she realized I wasn't going to budge. She asked me directly why I was being so difficult about money all of a sudden, especially when I knew I made more than the rest of them combined. I told her that my income didn't obligate me to subsidize everyone else's vacation preferences, and that I was looking forward to a trip we could all afford together. The family group chat became a flurry of activity over the next few days. My parents tried to mediate, suggesting various compromises that still involved me paying significantly more than my share. My brother proposed a sliding scale based on income, which coincidentally still left me covering most of the costs. I remained politely firm in my position. 1/6 of expenses, or I'd be happy to plan my own vacation that week. By June 25th, 5 days before the original departure date, they'd managed to find a much smaller, more modest rental property about 2 hours from home instead of the beachfront paradise they'd originally planned. The cost was less than half of their original choice, making it actually affordable for everyone to pay their fair share. The vacation itself was illuminating in ways I hadn't expected. Without the financial pressure of covering everyone's expenses, I found myself actually relaxing for the first time in years during a family trip. I wasn't mentally calculating costs every time someone suggested an activity or restaurant. I wasn't feeling resentful when my siblings ordered expensive drinks or insisted on premium accommodations. But the family dynamics had shifted noticeably. There was an underlying tension that hadn't existed before, at least not openly. My siblings were more careful about suggesting activities, clearly aware that they'd need to pay their own way. My parents seemed uncomfortable with the change, occasionally making comments about how different this trip felt from previous years. On the third day, my brother approached me during a walk on the beach. He asked me directly if I was angry about something, if there was an issue we needed to discuss. He seemed genuinely confused about why I'd suddenly changed the financial arrangement that had worked for so many years. I told him honestly that I'd realized I'd been enabling a dynamic that wasn't healthy for any of us. By always covering the majority of expenses, I created a situation where family vacations became something that happened to them rather than something we planned together as equals. He argued that we weren't equals financially, and that it made sense for the person with more resources to contribute more. I acknowledged that perspective, but explained that contribution and exploitation were different things. When family members start referring to you as a cash machine, the relationship has crossed a line. His face changed when I said that. He asked me what I meant, and I could see the moment he realized I might have overheard something I wasn't supposed to hear. I didn't elaborate, but I could see him thinking back to conversations and comments that might have reached my ears. The rest of our walk was quiet, and I could tell he was processing the implications of what I'd said. That evening, my sister approached me with what seemed like a prepared speech. She thanked me for all the years I'd helped make family vacations possible and acknowledged that they'd probably taken my generosity for granted. She said she hoped we could find a way to continue the tradition in a way that felt fair to everyone. I appreciated her words, though I suspected my brother had shared our conversation with her. Still, it felt like the first genuine acknowledgement I'd received of what I'd been contributing all these years. The remainder of the vacation was actually pleasant. Without the financial imbalance hanging over everything, conversations felt more natural. My nieces and nephews still had a great time, despite the more modest accommodations. My parents seemed to adjust to the new dynamic, and by the end of the week, the tension had largely dissipated. Update 1. The real test came 2 months later when my sister started a group chat about planning our winter holiday gathering. For years, this had been another event I largely financed, flights for family members who couldn't afford them, accommodation costs, elaborate dinners, and expensive gifts for all the kids. This time, the conversation was markedly different. Instead of assumptions about my contributions, there were actual discussions about budget constraints and what everyone could realistically afford. My brother suggested a potluck-style dinner instead of catered meals. My sister proposed setting a modest limit on gift exchanges. Most tellingly, nobody suggested expensive activities or accommodations without first discussing the cost implications for everyone involved. I contributed my fair share to the planning and expenses, nothing more and nothing less. The holiday gathering was smaller and simpler than previous years, but it felt more genuine. There was something refreshing about being treated as a family member rather than a funding source. Update 2. 6 months after the beach house incident, I overheard another conversation that confirmed my decision had been the right one. I was visiting my parents for Sunday dinner when my sister called. My mother put her on speaker, not realizing I was in the next room. My sister was complaining about a coworker who always expected others to cover her lunch expenses because she claimed to be broke, despite spending money freely on other things. My sister was frustrated about being taken advantage of and said she was going to stop enabling the behavior. The irony was apparently lost on her, but it wasn't lost on me. The same person who had called me a cash machine was now experiencing firsthand how it felt to be someone's assumed source of financial support. My mother made sympathetic noises and agreed that my sister shouldn't let herself be taken advantage of. Neither of them seemed to connect this situation to their own behavior toward me, but I found their conversation oddly validating. Update 3. A year has passed since I reset the financial dynamics in my family, and the changes have been profound and largely positive. Our family gatherings are smaller and simpler, but they feel more authentic. Nobody assumes I'll cover expenses beyond my fair share, and nobody treats my presence as primarily valuable for financial reasons. My relationships with my siblings have actually improved in unexpected ways. Without the underlying resentment I'd been carrying about being taken for granted, I find myself enjoying their company more. They seem to appreciate my contributions more when they're not assumed, and they've become more thoughtful about reciprocating in ways that don't involve money. My brother started inviting me to smaller gatherings at his house, where he cooks dinner and explicitly tells me not to bring anything. My sister has become more conscious about offering to pay when we grab coffee together, something that never happened before. Most importantly, I've learned to value myself appropriately within family relationships. Being generous with people you love is wonderful, but being taken for granted is corrosive to those relationships over time. The beach house vacation taught my family that I'm not a cash machine. I'm a person who deserves the same consideration and respect they'd give anyone else. It took some uncomfortable conversations and temporary tension, but ultimately it led to healthier dynamics for everyone involved. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for your family is to stop enabling behaviors that aren't good for any of you. Setting boundaries isn't selfish. It's necessary for maintaining relationships built on mutual respect rather than financial convenience. Looking back, I wish I'd addressed this issue years earlier instead of letting resentment build up silently. But I'm grateful for the lesson learned and the stronger family relationships that emerged from finally standing up for myself. The cash machine is permanently out of order, and everyone is better off for it.